No one plans to bury their child. Yet there I was, standing in front of a tiny, white casket. The sight of it was almost unbearable. Tucked inside with my son, Liam, was his favorite green blanket, his armor against the shadows of the world. He always told me it made him feel safe. Safe. A word that now felt like a cruel taunt. Because I had failed to protect him when it mattered most. The air in the church was thick, not with just grief but judgment. The whispers began long before the service. They weren't just mourning Liam, they were dissecting my life. Where is Sophia? The question burned in my ears, unspoken yet louder than the hymn playing softly in the background. My wife's absence loomed larger than my grief, giving the small-town gossips a fresh feast. What they didn't know was that just moments before stepping into the church, I had received a message that shattered me more than the funeral itself. My phone buzzed, and out of reflex, I glanced at it, expecting a condolence text or another logistical update about the service. Instead, my heart nearly stopped. A photograph filled the screen. It was sharp and vibrant, a scene bathed in sunlight, a resort, a pool, and Sophia. There she was, lounging in a bikini, a cocktail in hand. Her face glowed in the tropical sun, a smug-looking man's arm draped casually over her shoulder. Beneath the photo, a single line read, "Thought you should know what your wife is up to. A concerned friend." The world seemed to tilt. I blinked hard, hoping the image would vanish. It didn't. Sophia wasn't here, sitting by my side to mourn our son, as she had promised. She wasn't at a work conference or caught up in a last-minute emergency. She was in paradise. And me? I was standing at the edge of hell. I shoved the phone into my pocket, trying to bury the rage clawing its way to the surface. My mother's hand gripped my arm. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," I lied. Somehow, I made it to the front pew where Sophia should have been. The whispers behind me felt like needles piercing my back. Every word of the pastor's eulogy was a new weight pressing against my chest. Liam's joy, his endless curiosity, it all felt so far away, like a dream I couldn't hold onto. My fists clenched as the pastor mentioned Liam's love for coloring flowers with food dye. I could see it in my mind, his tiny hands stained blue and red, his laughter echoing in the hospital room. Now, his casket was surrounded by those same white roses, untouched by the colors he loved so much. Sophia had always complained that they were too plain. But these weren't for her. They were for him. And she wasn't even here to see them. Another buzz from my pocket. Another message from Sophia. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Important meeting. I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me? Make up for skipping your son's funeral? For sipping cocktails while I laid him to rest? I couldn't process it. Not yet. My voice didn't crack as I stood to deliver the eulogy, my shoulders squared under the weight of Sophia's betrayal. Every word was for Liam, a vow to protect his memory, to ensure that her absence wouldn't stain his legacy. But deep down, I made another vow. Sophia thought she could walk away from this unscathed. She was wrong. The funeral reception felt like a charade, a hollow performance meant to comfort the living. Plates of untouched food crowded every surface as people moved through the house, offering murmured condolences. Their eyes held pity, their voices rehearsed. I nodded politely, feeling like a ghost drifting through a life that no longer felt like mine. I could feel the whispers that trailed behind me, the questions they dared not ask aloud. Why wasn't Sophia here? How could a mother miss her child's funeral? But their silence was louder than words, a judgment pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Sophia's parents, Evelyn and Victor, hovered near the kitchen, their presence as unwelcome as the memories they stirred. Evelyn had always been quick to criticize, disguising her barbs as motherly concern. To her, I'd never been enough, never attentive enough, successful enough, or devoted enough to their precious daughter. When Evelyn approached, her tone was honeyed, but her sharp eyes betrayed her true intentions. "You've been so strong, Daniel," she said, her hand brushing my arm. "It's such a shame Sophia couldn't be here. But grief affects people in different ways, you know." Grief? She dared to use that word. My hands tightened around the framed photo of Liam I had been holding. It was one of my favorites, his gap-toothed smile bright against the backdrop of his science project. A rose, its petals dyed a brilliant blue, sat triumphantly in his small hands. "Grief," I repeated, my voice cold. "Is that what you think this is, Evelyn? Grief in a five-star resort while her son is being laid to rest?" Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Daniel, you must understand, Sophia needs space. She's handling this the best way she can." "Space?" I snapped, turning to face her fully. "She's drinking cocktails with some stranger while I bury our son. Don't stand here and defend her." Evelyn's mask of concern cracked, her lips pressing into a thin line. She opened her mouth to respond, but my mother's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough, Evelyn," she said, stepping beside me. Her presence was like a shield, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "You said more than enough." Evelyn retreated, her gaze filled with unspoken threats. As the room buzzed with muted conversation, my mother placed a steady hand on my arm. "She knows," my mother said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" I turned to her, the weight of her words sinking into my chest. "She knows what Sophia's been doing," my mother continued, her eyes narrowing toward the kitchen where Evelyn had retreated. "She's known for a long time." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Of course, Evelyn knew. She and Victor had always enabled Sophia's worst impulses, brushing aside her faults and blaming everyone else for her choices. But this was more than I could stomach. Later, when the guests began to trickle out, I retreated to my father's study, desperate for a moment of quiet. The familiar smell of old leather and polish wood greeted me as I sank into his chair. My mind raced with fragments of memories, trying to connect the dots I had missed. Sophia's late-night calls, her sudden work trips, the way she had pulled away from me, and from Liam, when things became difficult. Grief, I had told myself at the time. She was processing things differently, and I didn't want to judge. I thought I was giving her space to heal. Instead, I had given her the freedom to leave us behind. My phone burned in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring at the photo of Sophia and the stranger. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. This wasn't just a reminder of her betrayal, it was evidence. Evidence that I would need. My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. The number was unlisted, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Is this Daniel?" A woman's voice, hesitant yet urgent. "Yes," I replied, sitting up straighter. "Who is this?" "My name is Mia," she said. "I know what Sophia's been doing. I know about Hawaii. And I think you should know the rest." My chest tightened. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," she admitted. "But if you want the truth, meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow. Noon." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse racing. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, to write it off as a cruel prank. But another part, the part that couldn't stop replaying the photo of Sophia in paradise, knew I had to go. I glanced toward Liam's room as I stood, the soft glow of his nightlight spilling into the hallway. His favorite stuffed dinosaur sat on the bed, a silent witness to the chaos unraveling around me. "I'll fix this, buddy," I whispered into the darkness. "I promise." The next day, I walked into the coffee shop on Main Street, my stomach churning with equal parts dread and curiosity. The smell of burnt coffee and faintly stale pastries clung to the air, a stark contrast to the intensity of my thoughts. Mia sat in the far corner, her posture rigid and her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug. She was younger than I had imagined, with sharp green eyes that darted toward me as I approached. Her auburn hair was tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her expression was a blend of determination and nervousness. "You came," she said, her voice low but steady as I slid into the chair across from her. "I need answers," I replied, my tone curt. "Start talking." Mia leaned forward, her gaze locking onto mine. "Your wife, Sophia, has been seeing my ex-boyfriend for over a year." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I already know she's been unfaithful," I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "What I don't understand is why you're telling me this." "Because," Mia said, her voice growing sharper, "it's not just an affair. It's bigger than that. Have you ever wondered where she's getting the money for her little escapades?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table. It's all in there. Bank statements, flight receipts, emails, you name it." I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a copy of a life insurance policy. My heart sank. Liam's name was at the top, bold and unmistakable. "She took out the policy 6 months after Liam's diagnosis," Mia explained. "It's worth over $1 million. And look at the amendment date." I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisting when I saw it. Just weeks before Liam passed, Sophia had changed the beneficiary. My name had been replaced by hers alone. "She's already taken out loans against the policy," Mia continued, her voice cold. "Plane tickets, luxury hotels, even a deposit on a beachfront property. All of it's tied to her and him." I couldn't breathe. My grip on the papers tightened as the realization hit me. Sophia hadn't just betrayed me. She'd stolen from us, from Liam. "How do you know all this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with barely restrained anger. "Because Brandon, my ex, isn't exactly subtle," Mia replied, leaning back in her chair. "He brags. A lot." I didn't want to believe it at first, but then he started showing me proof, texts, account numbers, even a photo of the house they're planning to buy. I clenched my jaw. "Why are you telling me this? What's in it for you?" Mia's eyes darkened. "Revenge. Justice. Call it whatever you want. Brendan used me, lied to me, and threw me aside when I wasn't useful anymore. Sophia's going to do the same to you. To both of us. I'm not letting them get away with it." Her bitterness was palpable, and while I didn't trust her completely, I couldn't deny the evidence she had handed me. It was damning, every page worse than the last. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally, my voice low. "To take them down," Mia said bluntly. "I'll help you, but we have to act fast. They're meeting with a realtor tomorrow to finalize the sale on that property. If we want to stop them, that's our chance." I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. She met my gaze head-on, unflinching. "I'm in," I said at last, my voice like steel. Mia nodded, her expression softening just slightly. "Good. Because this is just the beginning." As I left the coffee shop, the weight of the envelope in my hand felt like a lead anchor dragging me down. But as I walked into the cold night air, I felt something else stir within me, a fire. Sophia thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. The next morning, I awoke before the sun, the envelope Mia had given me still sitting on the nightstand. Its contents were now burned into my mind: the policy, the amended beneficiary, the texts, the receipts. Each piece was a dagger aimed directly at my heart, and the deeper I looked, the more it became clear that Sophia had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. By the time I arrived at the realtor's office, my resolve was steel. The drive was a blur, my mind replaying every conversation, every late-night excuse Sophia had given over the past year. I had trusted her blindly, and now I was standing on the ruins of that trust. Mia was already there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She had a calmness about her that I envied, though her narrowed eyes betrayed a simmering anger. "They're inside," she said quietly as I walked up. "Sophia and Brandon. The paperwork's on the table. They're ready to sign." I nodded, gripping the folder in my hand like a lifeline. "Let's stop them." The receptionist's eyes flicked toward us as we stepped through the door, but she didn't say anything. My suit, Mia's professional demeanor, we looked like we belonged. The door to the meeting room was partially ajar, and I caught sight of Sophia first. She was laughing at something Brandon had said, her body language casual and confident. I pushed the door open without knocking. "Am I interrupting?" I asked, my voice cold enough to make both of them freeze. Sophia's face drained of color as she turned to face me. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" I replied, stepping fully into the room. "Finalizing the sale of a house you don't own?" Brandon's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The realtor, caught in the middle of the tension, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Reynolds, this doesn't concern you," I said, cutting him off without breaking eye contact with Sophia. "You might want to step out for a moment." The realtor didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his clipboard and hurried out of the room, leaving the three of us alone. Sophia stood, her hands trembling slightly as she forced a smile. "Daniel, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, dropping the folder onto the table. Its contents spilled out in a damning cascade of paper. "Explain how you forged my signature. How you stole from Liam's policy to fund your little getaway. Or maybe you'd like to explain the texts and emails Brandon so carelessly shared." Brandon's face darkened, and he took a step forward. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I shot back, pulling out my phone. I played the recording Mia had provided, the conversation between him and Sophia discussing the payout and the house. The color drained from Sophia's face as the words filled the room. Brandon reached for her arm. "Sophia, we should go." "No one is going anywhere," I said, my voice sharp. "Not until you both hear what I have to say." Sophia's composure cracked. "Daniel, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was desperate." "Desperate?" I laughed bitterly. "For what? To escape the life we built together? To leave me and Liam behind like we were nothing?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't done. "Do you know what the worst part is, Sophia? It's not the lies, or the betrayal, or even the money. It's that you weren't there for Liam when he needed you most. You abandoned him. You abandoned us." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Brandon, sensing the tide turning against them, squared his shoulders. "This isn't going to hold up in court," he said, his tone defiant. "Maybe not," I replied, stepping closer to him. "But it doesn't have to. Because this isn't just about the legal consequences, Brandon. It's about exposing you for who you really are. And trust me, when I'm done, there won't be a single corner of this town, or any other, where you can hide." The room fell into a heavy silence. Sophia slumped back into her chair, her face a mask of despair. Brandon glanced toward the door, clearly weighing his options. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low. "Oh, it's over," I replied, gathering the papers from the table. "You just don't know it yet." As I turned to leave, Mia gave Brandon a cold smile. "Good luck with your beachfront dream, Brandon." Looks like the tide's going out. Outside, the crisp winter air felt like a balm against my heated skin. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside me. Mia fell into step beside me. That was intense, she said, her voice tinged with approval. It's not enough, I replied, my gaze fixed ahead. Not yet, she nodded. We'll get them. Both of them. This is just the beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Sophia or Brandon walk away from this unscathed. They had played their hand, and now it was my turn. By the time I got home, the events at the realtor's office replayed in my mind like a twisted highlight reel. The look on Sophia's face when I confronted her, the way Brandon's bravado faltered, it gave me a fleeting sense of satisfaction. But satisfaction wasn't enough. Not when the life I'd built with Sophia had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece. The next day, I sat with Marcus, an old friend who had turned his talent for debate into a thriving legal career. As I laid everything out for him, the forged documents, the policy amendments, the recordings, his expression shifted from disbelief to a razor-sharp focus. This isn't just a divorce case, Daniel, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. This is fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. We can't let them get away with this. I don't intend to, I replied, my voice firm. Marcus nodded, flipping through the pile of evidence I'd brought. We'll start by filing motions to freeze her access to any remaining funds. If she's already siphoned off this much, there's no telling what she'll do next. The weight of his words sank in. Sophia hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd taken tangible steps to strip away the remnants of our life together. And worse, she had dragged Liam's memory through the mud to do it. I clenched my fists. Do whatever it takes, Marcus. I want her stopped. That afternoon, as I worked with Marcus to solidify our case, I realized there was one angle I hadn't yet explored. Sophia's parents. Evelyn and Victor had always stood by her, no matter how questionable her actions. But now, with everything I knew, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more involved than they let on. My mother confirmed my suspicions later that evening as we sat in the quiet of the living room. Evelyn came by a few months ago, she said, stirring her tea. She was asking about the house, whether your father's memory had been causing him trouble, whether we considered downsizing. I frowned. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think much of it at the time, she admitted, her gaze distant. But now I see what they were trying to do. She handed me a small notebook, its pages filled with notes and dates. I started keeping track of their visits after that. I knew something wasn't right. The notes painted a clear picture. Evelyn and Victor had been circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had even tried to manipulate my father into signing over the house, knowing his memory wasn't what it used to be. My anger burned hotter with every word. They think they can take everything, I muttered. They think I won't fight back. They underestimated you, my mother said firmly. But I didn't. You'll make this right, Daniel. For Liam. The next day, Marcus uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. Emails between Sophia and Evelyn revealed their plan to not only take the house, but also drain what was left of my father's savings. This is elder abuse, Marcus said, his tone laced with disgust. They targeted your father knowing he was vulnerable. That's not just immoral, it's criminal. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had preyed on my father's illness, twisting his confusion into a weapon against him. That's it, I said, my voice cold and steady. We're going after all of them. Marcus grinned. I like the way you think. The fallout began almost immediately. Marcus moved swiftly, filing motions to freeze all transactions tied to the house and any accounts under Sophia's name. He also initiated elder abuse charges against Evelyn and Victor, ensuring their involvement wouldn't be swept under the rug. Sophia, for her part, tried to maintain her composure. She called me multiple times, leaving voicemail after voicemail. Each one was a desperate attempt to spin the narrative in her favor. "Daniel, you're overreacting," one message said. "We can work this out." "This isn't what you think," said another. "I was just trying to secure a future for us. Please call me back." I didn't respond. Brandon, predictably, folded under the pressure. Marcus had uncovered enough evidence to tie him to multiple fraudulent transactions, and when faced with the prospect of jail time, he turned on Sophia without hesitation. "She masterminded the whole thing," Brandon admitted during a deposition. "The policy, the house, all of it. She said it would be easy because Daniel was too distracted by his grief to notice." Every word cut deeper than the last, but I didn't let it show. I kept my focus on the goal, justice. In court, Sophia and her parents faced a litany of charges: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, each piece a nail in the coffin of their once pristine reputations. The judge ruled decisively in my favor. The house was awarded to me outright, and the life insurance payout, what was left of it, was redirected to its original purpose, supporting pediatric cancer research in Liam's name. Sophia's accounts were frozen, her assets seized, and her pleas for leniency fell on deaf ears. Evelyn and Victor, once so smug and untouchable, were left with nothing but disgrace. Their influence in the community evaporated, and the whispers of their betrayal spread like wildfire. But even as the legal battle ended, I knew the scars would remain. Sophia's actions had fractured something deep within me, something that couldn't be easily repaired. With the court ruling behind me, I thought I might finally feel some relief. Instead, the silence of the house felt oppressive. Liam's laughter no longer echoed through the halls, and the absence of Sophia, while welcome, left a vacuum where her betrayal still lingered. It was a bitter irony that the very walls I fought so hard to protect now seemed to close in on me. The foundation I had created in Liam's name became my refuge. Dedicating my energy to something good, something meaningful, helped keep the darker thoughts at bay. The Liam Taylor Foundation for Pediatric Cancer wasn't just a name on paper. It was a promise to my son, a commitment to ensuring that other families wouldn't have to suffer the way we had. The foundation's first grant went to the pediatric cancer ward where Liam had spent so many of his days. I visited the hospital often, meeting parents who were living through their own versions of my nightmare. Each time I saw a child smile despite their struggles, I felt a flicker of hope. Liam's spirit lived on in every one of those moments. But even as I focused on the foundation, Sophia and her parents lingered like shadows on the periphery of my life. Their disgrace was public knowledge now, whispered about in coffee shops and grocery store lines. Evelyn and Victor had retreated from the community entirely, their social circle reduced to nothing. Sophia, however, was not so easily silenced. It started with a letter. I found it on the kitchen counter one morning, the envelope unmarked, but the handwriting unmistakably hers. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. "Daniel," it began, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need you to understand something. I never meant for things to get this far. I was scared of losing everything, of not being enough. What I did was unforgivable, but I hope one day you'll see that I was trying to survive, even if I went about it the wrong way. Please know that despite everything, I love Liam. I'll carry the weight of his loss with me forever. I know you won't believe me, but it's true. I'm leaving town. There's nothing left for me here, and I can't face the whispers anymore. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. Not for my sake, but for yours. Sophia." Her words, hollow and self-serving, sparked a familiar anger, Survive? She called what she did survival? Using Liam's memory, exploiting his illness, that wasn't survival. It was greed. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash, my resolve hardening. Sophia might have been ready to leave, but I wasn't done yet. Mia and I met the next day in a small cafe downtown. She had remained an unexpected but steady ally throughout this ordeal. Her insight into Brandon's arrogance had been invaluable, and together, we had unraveled more of Sophia's schemes than I could have managed alone. I figured you'd want to see this, she said, sliding her phone across the table. On the screen was an email thread between Brandon and Sophia. It was dated just days before the court ruling and detailed a plan to liquidate what little remained of their ill-gotten assets. Brandon's tone was impatient, Sophia's defensive. I told you I'm working on it. One of her replies read, I just need a little more time to figure out the accounts. He's watching everything. She's still trying to salvage something, Mia said, her tone laced with disdain. She doesn't know when to quit. She'll never stop. I muttered, my jaw tightening. Not until there's nothing left to take. Mia leaned back in her chair, studying me. What's your next move? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But I'm not letting her slip away again. That evening, I sat in my father's study, poring over the remnants of the legal case. The papers, the evidence, the recordings, it was all still there, neatly filed but impossible to forget. As I flipped through the pages, an idea began to take shape. Sophia might have been ready to leave town, but she hadn't done so yet. If she thought she could quietly disappear with whatever scraps she could gather, she was sorely mistaken. I called Marcus. How long would it take to get a subpoena for her recent financial activity? I asked. Not long, he replied. Why? Because she's still playing games, I said, the fire in my chest reigniting. And it's time to end this once and for all. The courtroom victory should have been the end, but life rarely ties things up with neat little bows. Sophia's absence from my day-to-day life was glaring, even if it was exactly what I'd fought for. Without her, the house felt quieter, almost cavernous. Yet, every creak in the floorboards and every echo in the empty halls reminded me of the lies she left behind. I focused on the foundation. Every hour spent working on it was a tether, grounding me to something real. But even as I poured my heart into the cause, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia hadn't let go completely. It was Mia who confirmed my suspicions. We met in a cafe downtown, as we often did, to discuss updates on the fallout from the case. She slid into the seat across from me, her expression grim. You're not going to like this, she said, pulling out her phone. What now? I asked, already bracing myself. She opened a folder of screenshots, all time-stamped within the past week. Bank account notifications, withdrawals, transfers, transactions tied to an account I thought had been frozen. She's still at it, Mia said, her tone sharp. Sophia's been accessing an offshore account under a different name. She's trying to siphon what's left before anyone catches on. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. How is this even possible? We shut everything down. She's clever, Mia admitted, though her voice was tinged with disgust. But not clever enough. These kinds of accounts leave trails, even if she thinks they don't. We just need to act fast before she disappears completely. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of this new revelation pressing down on me. Sophia wasn't just running from the consequences of her actions. She was actively working to undermine everything I had fought to protect. What do you want to do? Mia asked, her eyes steady. We're going to stop her, I said, my voice cold. Once and for all. Later that night, I called Marcus, explaining everything Mia had uncovered. His reaction was immediate. She's violated the court orders, he said. That's enough to bring her back into court and potentially file criminal charges. But if we want to catch her in the act, we'll need proof. Proof. The word echoed in my mind as I sat in my father's study, staring at the pile of evidence we had already gathered. It felt like an endless cycle, Sophia scheming, me uncovering, and the court stepping in to clean up the mess. But this time, I wasn't going to wait for the system to work. I was going to confront her head-on. Sophia's movements weren't hard to track. Despite her attempts at secrecy, she couldn't resist returning to familiar places. One of those places was a high-end hotel on the edge of town, the same one where she and Brandon had been spotted months earlier. With Mia's help, I pieced together her recent transactions and booked a room at the same hotel. It was risky, but I needed to see her for myself, to catch her in the act. The hotel lobby was quiet when I arrived, the muted hum of conversations blending with the soft piano music in the background. I spotted Sophia almost immediately, sitting at the bar with her phone in hand. She looked polished, as always, but there was a tension in her posture, a nervous energy that betrayed her usual composure. I approached quietly, taking the seat beside her before she even noticed. When she turned to look at me, her face went pale. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Sophia," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her eyes darting toward the exit. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the folder Mia had sent me and slid it across the bar. "Care to explain this?" She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from shock to defiance. "I don't owe you an explanation. You owe me everything," I said, my voice low but firm. "And you owe Liam even more." Her composure cracked at the mention of his name. "Don't bring him into this," she hissed. "How can I not?" I snapped. "You used him, Sophia. You used his memory, his legacy, to fund your escape. And now you're trying to run again." She didn't respond, her jaw tightening as she turned away from me. "You think you're untouchable," I continued, leaning closer. "But you're not. I've already spoken to Marcus. The courts are going to know about this, and this time, there won't be a shred of sympathy left for you." For a moment, she looked like she might fight back, but then her shoulders slumped. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then explain it to me," I challenged. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place, fear, regret, or maybe just exhaustion. But whatever she was about to say, she swallowed it down and stood abruptly. "This conversation is over," she said, grabbing her bag. "Walk away, Sophia," I said as she turned to leave. "But you'll never outrun this. I promise you that." Back in my room, I called Marcus to update him on the confrontation. "She's going to slip up," he said confidently. "People like her always do. And when she does, we'll be ready." I hung up, staring out the window at the city lights below. Sophia's betrayal had already cost me so much, but I wouldn't let her take anything more. The battle wasn't over yet. Sophia's abrupt departure from the hotel left me with more questions than answers, but it also reignited a fire I hadn't felt in weeks. She was running out of moves, her defenses crumbling with every step. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the tide was finally turning in my favor. Back home, Marcus wasted no time filing new motions to freeze the offshore accounts Mia had uncovered. The evidence was damning, withdrawals and transfers that Sophia had authorized while under court orders not to touch the funds. Her arrogance was staggering, but it was also her undoing. "She's desperate," Marcus said during a call the following morning. "Desperate people make mistakes, and we're going to use every single one of them against her." It wasn't just about stopping her anymore. It was about holding her accountable, making sure she couldn't slither away from the damage she'd caused. A few days later, I got a call from Mia. "You need to see this," she said, her tone urgent. She sent me a link to a news article. The headline read, local woman accused of fraud amidst family scandal. My stomach dropped as I clicked on the story. It was about Sophia. The article detailed the elder abuse allegations, the insurance fraud, and even hinted at the offshore accounts. "She's lost the court of public opinion," Mia said when I called her back. "And it's only going to get worse." But for all the satisfaction I felt, I couldn't ignore the gnawing unease in the back of my mind. Sophia wasn't the kind of person to go down without a fight. She still had something up her sleeve. I was sure of it. That suspicion was confirmed 2 days later, when I received a letter from her attorney. It was short and to the point. Sophia was requesting a private meeting to discuss unresolved matters. Marcus was skeptical. "She's fishing for a deal," he said. "She knows she can't win in court, so she's trying to cut her losses." "Should I go?" I asked. He hesitated. "If you do, don't go alone. Take someone you trust, someone who can keep a level head. And don't agree to anything without consulting me first." The meeting was set for a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. I arrived 10 minutes early, bringing Mia along as my second pair of eyes. She wasn't just sharp. She was fearless, and I knew she wouldn't let Sophia get away with anything. When Sophia walked in, she looked different. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had always seemed untouchable. In her place was someone who looked worn. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes carried a weariness I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "This isn't a courtesy call, Sophia," I replied, my tone sharp. "Say what you need to say." She glanced at Mia, her lips tightening. "Do we really need an audience for this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "You don't get the luxury of private conversations anymore." Sophia sighed, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. "I want to make things right," she said finally. I laughed bitterly. "You want to make things right? After everything you've done? I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice trembling. "I was scared. I made mistakes. But I'm not a monster, Daniel." "Then what are you?" Mia interjected, her voice icy. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone who only cares about herself." Sophia glared at her, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to me. "I'm offering to settle," she said. "I'll give up my share of the remaining funds. I'll sign over the house. I just want to move on." "Move on?" I said, my voice rising. "You don't get to move on, Sophia. You don't get to walk away from this unscathed while everyone else picks up the pieces of what you destroyed." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. "Every step of the way, you had a choice," I continued. "You could have done the right thing. You could have put Liam first. But you didn't. You chose greed. You chose betrayal. And now you want me to just let you off the hook?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quietly. "I just want this to be over." "Well, it's not over," I said, standing. "Not until you face the full consequences of your actions." Mia followed me out of the cafe, leaving Sophia sitting alone in the booth. As we drove away, Mia broke the silence. "Do you think she was serious about settling?" "Maybe," I said. "But it doesn't matter. She doesn't get to dictate how this ends." Mia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "She's unraveling, Daniel. It's only a matter of time before everything falls apart." Sophia's request for a settlement didn't change anything. Marcus advised me to reject her offer outright, and I agreed. Letting her off the hook now would have undermined everything I'd fought for. In the weeks that followed, her legal battles intensified. Her offshore accounts were frozen, and new charges were filed against her for attempting to circumvent court orders. Evelyn and Victor, still reeling from their own disgrace, offered no support. They had their own problems to deal with, and Sophia was quickly becoming an afterthought in their lives. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, I felt like justice was within reach. The day the final charges were filed against Sophia, I felt the smallest glimmer of peace. For months, I had been chasing justice, piecing together fragments of the life she had tried to destroy. Now, with her offshore accounts frozen, her assets seized, and her allies abandoning her one by one, Sophia was finally out of moves. Marcus called me that morning, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "We've got her," he said simply. "The courts froze the last of her hidden funds. Without those, she's got nothing left to leverage." I let out a long breath, the weight of his words settling over me. "What happens next?" "She'll have to face the judge again," Marcus explained. "If she doesn't cooperate this time, she could be looking at jail time. But either way, this is the end of her financial schemes." For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. Sophia's downfall wasn't just legal, it was personal. The small-town whispers that once protected her image had turned into a relentless tide of condemnation. People who once praised her charm now crossed the street to avoid her. Evelyn and Victor had retreated entirely, their home listed for sale, and their social circle reduced to nothing. Mia kept me updated on Sophia's movements, her knack for uncovering details sharper than ever. "She's still living at that hotel," she told me during one of our calls. "But it's only a matter of time before she's forced out. Her accounts are empty, and the staff isn't exactly sympathetic." "She made her choices," I said, though the words felt hollow. "That she did," Mia replied, "but it doesn't make it any less tragic." One evening, as I sat in the study going over the Foundation's latest projects, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Daniel," came Sophia's voice, shaky and uncertain. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone flat. "I don't know where else to turn," she said. "I've lost everything, my family and my friends. I need help." "Help?" I repeated, my anger simmering just below the surface. "After everything you've done, you think I'd help you?" "I made mistakes," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "But I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean to steal from your own son's memory?" I interrupted. "You didn't mean to manipulate your parents, to forge signatures, to funnel money into secret accounts? Which part of this wasn't intentional, Sophia?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." "For what?" I snapped. "For getting caught? For losing everything you thought you deserved? Or for ruining the life we built together?" Her sobs were audible now, but they didn't move me. "I can't undo what I've done," she said. "But I need a second chance. Please, Daniel." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. "You don't get to ask for a second chance," I said, my voice like steel. "Not from me. Not from Liam." I ended the call, letting the weight of her words hang in the silence. The next day, Marcus confirmed what I already suspected. "Sophia's legal team is preparing a plea deal," he said. "She's going to admit to everything in exchange for reduced charges." "And if the court agrees?" I asked. "She'll avoid jail time, but she'll lose any remaining assets and be barred from financial management for years," he explained. I leaned back in my chair, the words settling heavily. It wasn't the punishment I'd hoped for, but it was something. Sophia would no longer have the power to hurt anyone else the way she had hurt me and Liam. A few weeks later, the plea deal was finalized. Sophia stood before the court, her once polished demeanor replaced by a hollow version of herself. She admitted to the fraud, the forgery, and the manipulation. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the cracks in her armor. When the judge handed down the sentence, a lifetime of financial restitution, and the loss of all her remaining assets. Sophia didn't react. She simply nodded, as though the weight of it all had finally crushed her spirit. As I watched from the gallery, I felt no triumph, no sense of victory. Just a quiet, bittersweet relief that it was finally over. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. The house, now fully mine, became a sanctuary, a place where Liam's presence lingered in every corner. The foundation continued to grow, its reach extending to families across the country. Each new grant, each family helped, felt like a small step toward healing. Mia and I stayed in touch, her sharp wit and unwavering support a constant source of strength. "You did it," she said during one of our calls. "You got justice." "Maybe," I replied, "but it doesn't feel like a win. Because it's not about winning," she said. "It's about doing what's right. And you did that, Daniel. For Liam." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. One evening, as I stood in Liam's room, I found myself holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. The memories came rushing back. His laughter, his boundless curiosity, his love for life even in the face of his illness. "I kept my promise, buddy," I whispered. "I made it right." A soft breeze rustled through the open window, carrying with it a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I allowed myself to let go, not of Liam, but of the anger and pain that had consumed me for so long. As I stood there, the weight of the past finally began to lift. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm I never thought I'd find again. The chaos of legal battles and betrayals was behind me, leaving space for something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. The house, once a battleground for Sophia's schemes, became a place of quiet reflection. I spent my days working on the foundation, pouring every ounce of my energy into honoring Liam's legacy. The Liam Taylor Foundation grew beyond anything I had imagined, funding research, supporting families, and creating a ripple effect of hope. One morning, I received a letter from a family whose daughter had benefited from a grant. They wrote about how the funding had allowed them to stay by their child's side during treatment, how they'd been able to focus on what truly mattered. "You've given us a gift we can never repay," the letter read. "Thank you for making Liam's legacy a light in our darkest moments." I folded the letter carefully, placing it in a small box where I kept other mementos of Liam. It was a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, good could still emerge. Sophia, meanwhile, disappeared from my life entirely. The last I heard, she had moved to another state, trying to rebuild what little remained of her world. Her parents had sold their home and retreated into obscurity, their influence in the community reduced to whispers of a scandal no one would forget. I didn't waste time wondering about her anymore. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Mia remained a steadfast presence, though our relationship evolved from allies to something more like friends. Her humor and resilience were a balm in moments when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. During one of our coffee meetings, she leaned back with a sly smile. "So what's next for you, Daniel?" I shrugged. "The foundation keeps me busy. And beyond that, I'm figuring it out." "You deserve more than just figuring it out," she said. "Liam would want that for you." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. On the anniversary of Liam's passing, I visited the cemetery alone. The sky was a pale blue, the air crisp with the first hints of spring. I knelt by his grave, tracing the engraving on the headstone, "Liam Taylor, forever our light." I placed his favorite stuffed dinosaur at the base of the stone and sat quietly, letting the memories wash over me. "I hope I've made you proud, buddy," I whispered. "You deserve so much more than this world gave you, but I'm doing my best to make sure your light keeps shining." A monarch butterfly fluttered past, its wings catching the sunlight like stained glass. I watched it spiral upward, a small smile tugging at my lips. For the first time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of grief. It was still there, a quiet ache in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. That evening, as I sat in the living room, I looked through the old photo albums I had packed away during the worst of the legal battles. There were pictures of Liam's first birthday, his first day of school, and countless moments in between. Each photo was a reminder of the love we had shared, a love that no betrayal could ever erase. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this. The pain, the anger, the loss, they had changed me. But in their wake, they had left behind something unexpected: strength. Liam's spirit lived on in the foundation, in the lives of the families it touched, and in the memories I carried with me. As I closed the album and turned off the light, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would face it with the same resilience Liam had shown every single day of his life. And that was enough.